Welcome to this session. In the last session, we looked at Hello World app and we got hands-on practice with working with the system class. And then, as promised, you're supposed to build on those concepts. So to build more on the concepts we've covered so far, we look at how Java, the programming language, and the technology can be applied in our real-world scenarios. So I want us to think of an object. And for the sake of the discussion, so we could all be in one page, let's all make that object a database. Now, the database here is the kind of object it is, and it will serve as our blueprint or what we call a class. So the individual objects of that kind that we could have is the MySql database engine, Postgres database engine, Oracle database engine, among others. If you're coming from a background of IT or computer science, you probably have heard of these engines or worked with them. If you're coming from a background of the same, then you probably have heard or worked with database. If not, you can just pause the video and have a quick definition on what a database is and pick any engine at random and have a quick definition on what it is. Now, in this case, we're just going to focus on the basics of class declaration. We have to try my best to stick within the scope of the title because there are other sessions coming up where we'll take a deep dive into some of the concepts, but not at this point. So how do we say, how do we represent this into object-oriented programming concepts? We would say, for example, Oracle is an instance of the class or blueprint of objects called database. So let's build on that slowly by slowly. We've already looked at the class definition. We did this in a previous session. If you missed it, you can just either look at the card that will direct you there or just find it as one of the sessions before this one. So we have the class definition as the class keyword, the name of the class, the opening braces and the closing braces, and then your code will go as the class body in between there. So from the same definition, you can create various classes. And in this case, we want to create the class database, which is the object kind that we are all thinking about right now to bring real world and Java together. So class database, class keyword, the database is the name, opening braces, closing braces, and then your code will go in there. Now, there's more things or more to the class. We have class members, okay? One of the class members is a field. A field is used to represent the state of the class or its objects. So for example, if it's a database we're talking about, a potential state would be connection string, among others. Now, we'll talk more about this. We'll talk more about fields later. For now, we're just understanding the members. So one, fields, still in the scope of class declaration. Then we have another member, methods. So methods are used to represent behaviors. For example, for a database, disconnect. Now, it depends on the method or the object you're working with. The method represents behaviors, and its name should reflect as such. As fields represent state, and its name should reflect as such. But we'll talk more about this. We'll look at more conventions, more naming conventions, and so on. But for now, the naming convention that we should all agree on is that conventionally, the class name should start with a capitalized letter, so the upper camel case. Now, in this class right here, we're not seeing a main method. In our Hello World app, there was a main method. So in this class, we're not seeing a main method. So where is the main method? The main method will be applied in the main class because ideally, for big projects, we have different blueprints or different classes for one app. So ideally, you would then want to have one main method where you go and run the entire app in its sequentially, in the sequence you want it to run with. So let's review our database blueprint and then we will be back here to continue building up on the concept of class declaration. So I will be sharing this link to this code in the description. It's in the description actually. If you would wish to follow along, you can just go and fetch the link. Otherwise, for now, let's just look at the class database. So class keyword, database is the name, opening curly braces. These are the fields. Connection string, a state, username, a state for the database, password, a state for the database. Another concept that we look at is the constructor. Let me just comment this out for now, so we can focus with the flow that we are currently holding. I'm just commenting this out so we can focus. I'll add it later. Bear with me, please. I will add it in a bit. I want us to focus on field and methods. So the method we have is connect, disconnect, execute query, and print status, which are applicable at the database. Again, we're sticking to the basics. We only want to understand, the class declaration. So going back to this, the constructor that I'll take us back to. So there is a default constructor that is applied for us by the compiler. If you don't include a custom constructor, the default constructor will be applied for you. And what it is used for is this kind of scenario. So within our blueprint, our class, ours is called database specifically. The constructor of the blueprint is supposed to take the blueprint and then create objects from it. So this is how the real world concept comes in. Now, I will walk to the main method to show us how to do this. So let's see here in the database class, and again, it has its methods and it has its fields. Currently, there is no field, there's no constructor within the class body, but a default constructor has been applied. So I'm switching to the main class to show us how we can have one main method to do everything in. So if I want to create an object in Java, I will need to use the constructor, which has the same name as the class. Let's call this Oracle as the object we want to create. Then I'll need to use the new keyword and instantiate the class. So this is how you create an object in Java. We'll talk more about that when we're discussing constructor. For now, we are only interested in understanding the class declaration, and this is part of it. We could create another object, for example, MySql, new database, and that. So in this case, we can then invoke methods from the blueprint via the object we've created. So for example, Oracle and the method disconnect. Now if I was to take us back to this database, the method disconnect expects disconnect from the database to be sent to the output if I was to run it. So if you come back here, we are running it via the object Oracle, and then in that case, I should see disconnected from the database and the output. If I was to create another object, if I was to invoke another method via the different object, then I'll still have the same output, but for that different object. We'll talk more about why that is. I expect to see two disconnect from the database for two different objects. We'll talk more about that concept. For now, again, we are in the scope of class declaration, so don't jump ahead. Don't rush yourself in the learning process. This is what we do, within the main class. So we're starting to see why it would be necessary to have a main class with a main method there, and then others will just exist without main methods. Now, sometimes you might need to have a custom constructor, because remember, you use the constructor when you're initializing an object, when you're creating an object, okay? So if you would wish to pass custom elements when you're creating an object, you can work with a custom constructor. For example, because this is very faint ink, I'll do better next time. Let me just go back to the code and show you. So, for example, the code that I had commented out, let's have this constructor here. Is our custom constructor. It has the same name as the class. So there we go. we have the custom constructor public database. And what we want to customize when you're creating the object is the start connection string, the start username, and the start password. So we are setting the field to the arguments that will be passed. Now, after I do that, I'll see 3 problems. Why? Because when you include a custom constructor, it overrides the default constructor. Remember, the default constructor has no arguments, no class, no body. So if you use a custom one, then you're overriding the default one. And in that case, there will be errors here because it will be expecting you to pass the arguments of the custom constructor. So if you would still wish to work with the default constructor, then you will need to also include another constructor that mimics the default constructor like that. So in that case, I will see it has 3 usages, okay? And those usages then are the ones that are here. So the errors on this side have disappeared. However, I still see problems here because I'm expected to use this constructor that I've just created. The IDE is very intelligent. So in that case, let's go in the main method and see how we can apply that. So we'll create another object. We'll call it Postgres. And we just want to work with the custom constructor. The constructor we just customized. Just put a comma there. So we're expecting to put our default URL, our customized URL with the object. Another thing we expected to do is to put the name, so admin. Another thing it expects from us is the password, so maybe abdc pass, something like that. So in that case, anytime you're interacting with Postgres object, then we would expect that these are the customization, but it still can invoke the methods like the others. But again, we'll talk more about this right now. Please, let's all focus on class declaration and class declaration only. Let's not jump ahead. We will be covering more about this later. Okay. So back to the class declaration, and I'll give us a summary so we can all be sure that we didn't go beyond the concepts. Again, you have your custom constructor because you want to have to instantiate your objects with custom in a custom fashion that is not covered by the default constructor. We'll see that. Another part of class declaration is seen when we are inheriting, or rather when we are subclassing our blueprint. For example, right now, Object Oracle, Object Postgres, Objects MySql, they are all okay with the blueprint, seems to cover everything, the URL, the connection string, the so on and so forth methods. But sometimes you might find that for various reasons, you might need to work with subclassing, maybe because you want to separate by concerns, or you want to override a method and customize it besides what is in the original database. We will see this when we're discussing inheritance. But for now, again, we're sticking to class declaration, and this is still part of class declaration. So you have like this example here where you have your class Oracle, which is extending. So when you're inheriting, you work with the keyword extends in Java, extending the class database and the opening and closing braces, and then inside it you'll have the customization that is unique to the subclass. So in this case, we have this class here, class Oracle extends, which is the keyword database. Then you can do things here like override a method, for example. So the shortcut to overriding is Control-O. Then you get to select what you want to override. Like in this case, you can override even the constructor, yeah, and so on and so forth. So we'll talk more about this because you're seeing other keywords. So stay tuned for that. We are currently just taking to class declaration, so we need to keep it short and sweet. Okay. Then we have more on the declaration. So what we called class definition yesterday is what we are calling class declaration today. Sometimes you'll see those words used interchangeably. So class declaration then has the class keyword, the name, the opening braces. Of course, there's the body with the fields, constructors, or methods. It depends. Then we have the closing braces. Once again, the fields represent the state. The constructor represents what you would use to initialize the objects. Then the methods represent implementation of the behavior. And we've seen that in the database class. Now, there is more to this. When we speak of class declaration in Java, sometimes it could get complicated. For example, if you want to make the class public, okay, you could use the modifier public, all right? We have the class keyword, okay? We have the class name. We have extents when you need to inherit from a parent class. And in that case, the parent class name will come here. We'll talk about this in inheritance. We have the keyword implements when you need to work with an interface. We'll talk about this in interfaces. There's a session coming up for that. Still part of the object-oriented programming concepts. Then the opening braces, the closing braces, then the contents. So when we talk about class declaration, there's the simple one that we can all remember by now, class keyword, the name of the class, opening braces, closing braces, and the members of the class, the fields, the constructors, the methods, or sometimes this complicated version. So for now, don't worry too much about this. It will make more sense after we are discussing. For example, there's a session where we'll discuss modifiers. Then we'll see different types of modifiers. Class name, that one we have already mastered, I hope. Then we have extents keyword for when you're working with a parent class or a super class. We'll see what that is in inheritance, but it's part of the class declaration. Then we have, so in that session, I'll just be saying we are declaring the class, and I hope that will ring some bells. Then we have implements when you're working with interface or interfaces, because you can implement more than one interface, as we will see when you're discussing interfaces. So that is it. This is the summary of our class declaration. I hope we will remember where we came from. We thought of an object, the object type database, and we needed to see how we can work with that as our blueprint with its members as applicable to a database in real world. Then we can work with the constructors to construct objects from our database type, as we did with Oracle, Postgres, and MySql. Then we can do that within the main method in our main class, because if it's one whole big app, then that is the best way to work with it, or some would prefer that for easy management. Then you can work with the custom constructor. Then you could work or create an object from the custom constructor, because with the custom constructor, then you might need to have, unique, or rather when you're instantiating the object, you need to pass in some arguments. Then you can work with subclassing with the extents keyword. Then to summarize on the declaration, you'd have this simple one with just one class, or a more complicated one. It doesn't have to have implement. Sometimes it could just quit at extents, like the way Oracle stopped at extents in this example here. Oracle stopped at extents. This is still part of the declaration class, Oracle extents database, yeah, and then the opening and the closing braces. So that is that on class declaration. I tried to stick to the scope, okay, of this discussion. So we don't have a title that is referring to a particular scope, but is covering beyond the scope. So while we continue on to expand our knowledge in Java, the technology and the programming language, we will still stick to the scope. And when we get to the areas I've mentioned, we'll also maintain that scope, and then all these things will start making sense altogether. So enjoy the code, that link that I will share. You can look through it. You could also look through the practice exercise that I will include in the description, so you can challenge yourself and see if you can remember what you are walking away with from this class declaration concept. So I'll be seeing you on the next one.